I just thought I'd keep mine short today. For those of you who are here, I'm Toonie. I'm the Executive Director of District Hall in Venture Café Providence. Welcome to our Venture Cafe Thursday Gathering virtual session. This is the last of our 12 to 1, and we're going out with a bang with our partnership with Ximedica and NEMIC. I'm going to hand it over to one of our partners, Danielle, and then I'm sure you'll hand it over to Ximedica.
Thanks, Toonie. Hi, everyone. I'm Danielle Sturm. I'm the Marketing Communications Manager at the New England Medical Innovation Center, otherwise known as NEMIC, and we are a MedTech venture studio located in Providence, Rhode Island, but we support startups and innovators from all over the world develop their businesses in the U.S., prepare for fundraising for the medical devices, and ultimately bring their medical ideas forward for successful commercialization. We're always super excited to co-host this MedTech Forum as it brings the newest innovations to the forefront of our community's brains, so that the innovators can create new medical devices that are utilizing the newest technologies on the market. You can learn more about joining our community on our website, and I'll drop a link in the chat very shortly. And I will turn it over to Jess Peach of Ximedica.
Hi everyone. As Danielle and Toonie gave me a nice segue. Ximedica, if you're not familiar with it, is a product development consultancy specializing in medical device and healthcare products for a wide range of clients, from startups all the way through to Fortune 500 companies. I've been at the company for more than 15 years now, and it's a group of essentially very smart people in the research field, in engineering and industrial design. And our approach is highly collaborative, and we welcome any kind of engagement with a wide range of clients from the very beginning, from you starting with a blank piece of paper to an initial idea that needs to have some practical application applied to it, all the way through to helping a client get through FDA approval and regulatory approval across the globe. Many of our projects span a wide range of places. All right, so to jump right in, I'm going to share my screen. So for those who are new to the forum, we almost always have a few newbies. What I try to do is give a kind of a overview of what we seek to do here. It's essentially a forum intended to kind of raise everyone's awareness about what is new coming out of academia, what's coming out of startups, what's even coming out of new FDA-approved devices, patents that have been applied. And it's really what's been available in the public forum in the last 6 to 8 weeks. And so I'm constantly reviewing newsletters and articles. Also, folks send me stuff that they think is relevant and appropriate, and I welcome any submission up to about an hour before the actual presentation. We cover a wide range of categories that are listed here. Obviously, a heavy focus on medtech development, but there are a number of different categories that even span beyond medtech, but also inspire medtech innovation as well. We've added and subtracted from this list over time, so you can see COVID-19. Hopefully we'll have that way behind us in the near future, but there's still a couple that crept in for this month's forum. All right, so to start off with the first category of materials, antimicrobial surfaces. Obviously this is a big desire for a lot of different reasons. We featured other types of antimicrobial surface inventions. This one comes out of Australia, Monash University. This team have essentially 3D engineered a surface that reduces bacterial growth by studying how bacteria growth kind of lives and behaves. And they're seeing this particular material as being particularly useful for catheters and also high risk, high touch, presumably surfaces that can transmit HAIs or hospital-acquired infections. So this team have discovered by watching and observing bacteria is that they really like sharp edges and nooks and crannies and corners that allow them to hide and avoid being washed away by a rinse of any kind, obviously. But when you look at it in terms of what that actually means for an engineered service, it provides a kind of a starting point for innovation. And so they've used a technology called UV or ultraviolet lithography to create a micro pattern surface that really is very, very smooth, and it has a cross-sectional topography that's particularly smooth. And they've tested this material on 3 types of infectious bacteria, including E. coli, one of the worst. And it found that they've been able to reduce bacterial attachment as a criteria. It's an interesting one, up to 68%, as well as microcolonies of bacteria forming and kind of, growing and bigger by up to 77%. So, thinking about how surfaces, when we look at them and our capability of looking at them through nano microscopes and really analyzing the surfaces, how we can be smarter about what those surfaces do, particularly in the context of places where we really want to reduce infection, like an operating room. Right, the next material is an enzyme embedded plastic. Enzymes are great because they can eat away at the things that we don't want to keep, particularly nasty proteins that maybe build up, or of course plastics that are now littering many of our natural habitats. And so this German team at the Fraunhofer Institute have explored. The tricky part of this is how to embed active enzymes in plastic materials in the production process of those plastics. And of course, plastics are made with high temperatures, and those high temperatures are typically destroying those enzymes, so they just can't live at those temperatures. But what they've figured out in their processes is that they've developed an inorganic carrier. It's a name I'm not going to be able to pronounce, which is why I didn't put it in here, which is highly porous, and that allows the enzymes to kind of creep into those pores and bind to them and still remain active and protected from those high temperatures. And so these, they've explored the idea of using protease enzymes embedded in these plastic sheets to break apart other proteins, as well as also self-clean, have that capability of self-cleaning. So really useful for potentially plumbing that's prone to blockages, that has protein buildup, or thinking about also as well plastics that we want to degrade over time. The quicker the better, please. This next material is also considered a diagnostic. It is a yeast infection detection that's built into the materials of a feminine hygiene product, either a tampon or a sanitary pad shown here. This is coming out of India, and what they basically found in this particular market is women who think they might have a yeast infection actually are very limited in their ability to do anything about it. They don't have easy access to a testing site, and they really don't have the ability to even understand whether their suspicions are correct. So this embedded material is coated with a molecule that, again, yay, enzymes, that bind to the enzymes that are secreted by the particular yeast that is known to cause these yeast infections, the Candida yeast. And so when this material is actually exposed to these yeast enzymes, the material changes color within 10 minutes of exposure. And the wonderful thing about this particular development is the cost of the material is actually really quite low cost in terms of adding potentially up to 22 to 28 cents per product. And it also, they think, is able to be adapted to diagnose also for UTIs as well, and particularly in the context of patients who are less able to articulate their symptoms, thinking about elderly care patients or more dementia-based patients. This also could be very useful in those kind of scenarios as well. This next material is also incorporating an embeddedness in a bandage now, is the idea of fluorescence incorporated through single-walled carbon nanotubes that are actually embedded into bandages of polymer fibers. And the component's able to react to chemical compounds that might be found in a wound. For example, hydrogen peroxide is something that's actually released by white blood cells when they are trying to respond and attack bacteria. And so that hydrogen peroxide can then, as a result of the reaction with these carbon nanotubes, can fluoresce under bright light and can be visible. When a device is placed over this bandage, it can trigger and then also analyze the fluorescence and send an early alert to an attending clinician to be able to better address that wound and an infection that might be starting to form there. Staying in the context of bandages, this is a peptide-based hydrogel coming out of the Swedish academic team called at Chalmers University. This patch contains antimicrobial peptides, and those are proteins that naturally occur in the immune system. They attack bacteria by focusing on a microbe's outer membranes, making them less likely to develop a peptide resistance over time. And so how this hydrogel nanostructure is working is it provides a protective environment for those peptides to stay intact until they're delivered into the wound site. Peptides are actually very fragile, and so this material is actually essentially holding those peptides, kind of like those porous, that porous membrane I was referring to in a previous technology. And the same basic premise is holding those peptides in place in a way that is able to kind of keep them lasting for longer. Chambers University's team is starting a spin-off enterprise called Ampheria, which is going to seek to commercialize the material as a skin patch and as well as a spray-on for wound dressings. All right, 3D printed microscaffolds are not particularly new, and particularly in terms of providing a prosthetic for an area of the body that you're wanting to fill as a kind of as either a wound or for bone regrowth. But this Australian team have developed an idea of creating a microscaffold that actually it's the opposite of what you're actually trying to fill. And the actual scaffold itself degrades over time. So the material is a biocompatible, biodegradable material, and it provides a form, as all microscaffolds do, that nurtures cell growth. And so the cells are placed, for example, if you take a part of your nose that's missing, for example, from a tumor or cancer, those cells from the adjacent bone gradually migrate into the tissue and roost within the empty spaces of the scaffold. And as the cells reproduce, the scaffold dissolves. The 3D printing technique that they've used is using a negative template of the scaffold's empty spaces, using a material called solid polyvinyl acetate glue. And then that's placed in the mold. And as the liquid polymer is poured in and solidified, water is used to dissolve the glue, leaving that skeleton that you actually want to fill with healthy tissue cells that then can reform the growth of the gap you're trying to fill. This next material is also a sensor and a diagnostic, and also can tick off the box of digital health as well. We've explored various different fabric embedded sensors before. This one is already been patented, and it's also machine washable. It's using advanced sensors that are woven in using a conductive material. And it's able, this patch is able to capture biometrics and biomechanical data that's then streamed via Bluetooth in real time to an app that's paired to the system. And because of the capability of the materials that they're using, this sensor device can measure angles and torque and strain and pressure above and beyond kind of the basic biometrics of a heartbeat or kind of a sweat sensor that we've covered in previous tech forums. So based on the dynamics of the sensor, you could actually determine whether an athlete is throwing a baseball pitch correctly based on how he's moving his arm and how he's flexing his muscles, or even if a weight trainer is lifting a weight properly to prevent injury and potentially improve technique. Textiles, which is the companies that's developed this product, is first launching the material with an arm and knee sleeves. One of our design research directors flagged this one for us, Kate McNamee. All right, staying in the realm of sensors, this is a video tracking that amplifies what to the stationary eye looks like nothing's happening. Using digital videography, this technique takes pixel level camera data and identifies deflection, movement, and vibration, and then amplifies it to really expose and measure particularly industrial structure vulnerabilities in a non-invasive way. So currently the kind of conventional method is you stick a whole bunch of sensors, the various different parts of your industrial plant are shown in the image here, hoping that you've got your sensors in the right locations. But now you can just set up one of these very sophisticated cameras from, further afield and really understand where your vulnerabilities lie. This technology has already been deployed in aerospace, energy, automotive, manufacturing, civil engineering, and mining industries. But they also can use this to even monitor a heartbeat. So the same technology used to set up against a patient, in the same room, can determine even a heartbeat from this amplified videography. Mike Metz, one of our engineers in Minnesota, flagged this one for us. Right, user interactions, sign language software. Actually, there's been a whole explosion of abilities to translate sign language into the alphabet and therefore closed captioning, or even for those folks who still need to learn ASL. Kate McNamee flagged an article that was, or a YouTube link actually, by Ricardo Santana, who is a college student who has developed his own version of Google's gesture-controlled artificial intelligence. But the idea is that Google itself is making this platform available for essentially universal improvement, encouraging inventors to improve its functionality and its stability, thinking about particularly involving how you might measure a hand signal when parts of the hand are hidden. The technology is actually able to start to now recognize even thumbs that disappeared in the image as shown on the main image here. So in development, and we should expect to start to see these kinds of ideas incorporated into videos moving forward. This next sensor device is a self-powered biochemical sensor coming out of NC State. Chris Jones, one of our R&D engineers, flagged this one for us. This is a sensor that leverages enzymes to generate signals, and there's a very lightweight battery, 4 times smaller and 20 times lighter than standard sensors today, and it just runs on sweat, which is pretty marvelous. The battery is made from a magnesium anode and a cathode, also made of silver and silver chloride, that is separated by a membrane dry cellulose layer. So when a person starts to sweat, that membrane absorbs the sweat, and that also, in a beautiful way, acts as an electrolyte, basically turning on the battery, and then being able to sense the metrics as it's trying to capture. Right, also staying in sensor devices, this is the smallest ultrasound microchip that exists today on the planet. It is injectable. So what we're seeing here is the very tip of a needle zoomed in at a lot of microscopic power. And this chip can be delivered via a microdermic needle and is intended to measure at this point internal body temperature. It has a fully functional electronic circuit, which is kind of mind-blowing in terms of the size of this thing. And it has a volume of less than 0.1 millimeters cubed, and is only visible under a microscope. So even if it was put in your body, you may not be even able to see it. It uses a piezoelectric transducer that acts as an antenna for powering it, as well as communication via ultrasound wavelengths. Its use has been demonstrated in live mice, and they're expecting to incorporate within this ultrasound chip blood pressure, glucose levels, and respiratory function in the near future. Pretty amazing, coming out of Columbia University. And maybe a more prosaic sensor in comparison is a labor monitoring sensor for mums who are about to give birth. There are several sensors out there. The kind of more conventional one is a belt that mom wears around her belly, but those slip and they don't stay in place, and they also tether the mother to the bed because they're connected through a series of wires. So this is a soft wearable sensor system that incorporates, as you can see from the image, a soft sensor on the belly, as well as a sensor on her fingertip. The combination of those two sensors, there's another one also attached to her chest, which is kind of a stamp size. And between those three sensors, they're able to collect both the vital signs of the mother and the baby and separate out the noise associated with those two humans in the same body, and also monitor for frequency of contractions. the data is sent to the nearest or most designated mobile device, whether it's a smartphone or a tablet as shown here, but could also provide some real value for mums who are remote, whether it's rural or in a low resource area, or even a mother who's choosing to be monitored at a home birth as well, which apparently is a growing trend. They piloted this in Ghana and India, low resource communities, of course, but this comes out of Northwestern University in Chicago. This next device is a pressure monitor that's designed for a disease or syndrome called acute compartment syndrome. And this is a condition where high pressure forms around muscles, and which is typically the result of a very significant trauma or injury to that muscle. And if it's not properly assessed and diagnosed over time, even though a patient might be complaining about pain of a muscle, that muscle can start to fail and get necrosis, and that can ultimately sometimes lead to disability and worst case scenario, amputation. The conventional method of assessing this acute compartment syndrome is pain assessments that the patient gives, and it's highly subjective and often misdiagnosed. So this device provides a digital pressure reading continuously for up to 18 hours while strapped to the patient's limb. The data is sent to a smartphone app and alerts the user for the key issues and the key criteria. They've got an FDA approval as well as CE mark approval in Europe. This next sensor device is a way to, again, objectively monitor skin. As skin diseases like psoriasis develop, they actually change the tactile surface of the skin and the dermis underneath the topical layer. And so this is an electrical mechanical sensor that can detect those differences in skin stiffness. It's a 2 square centimeter skin contact surface area in its design. It's hardwired. It's placed in the skin, on the skin in the area where there is concern, maybe a sense of itching or a sense of the patient's articulating a sense of symptoms. And an alternating electric current is applied using an internal magnet that rapidly vibrates and then sends pressure waves painlessly down into the skin. As the skin deforms in response to those waves, a strain sensing sheet on the sensor measures that deformation, and a computer then translates that data into a skin stiffness value, which is able to be objectively measured to rapidly detect for the presence of psoriasis within just a matter of a minute. And this is remarkable compared to some of the conventional methodologies that are much more complex to use, are larger devices, and much more cumbersome and involve significant periods of time in terms of patient assessment. This sensor device is also a diagnostic and is one that for some of the members of the Ximedica team who are listening, who may be working on a project that has relevance to this, you might want to kind of pay attention here. This is coming out of Duke University, and it's using a technology built into a toilet system to scan and classify feces as they're flushed through the system. And how they've developed this technology is using an algorithm that's reviewed over 3,000 images of stools that apparently can be categorized. And that algorithm has been able to then independently analyze different stools and classify them with an 85% accuracy, and also detect the presence of blood 76% of the time. And so they're anticipating that this toilet technology can essentially be installed in the pipes of a toilet. It doesn't require the patient to do anything other than just regularly flush a bowel movement, but to provide some biomarker analysis for really properly understanding kind of the biomeme that's existing within a patient's gut and endocrinetic system. Moving into robotics, this is a tactile brain-computer interface, or BCI is the acronym for robotic control, coming out of University of Pittsburgh. They've wanted to explore, this particular academic team, of what happens when you incorporate direct sensory feedback to the brain as you're working with a robotic arm, thinking like along the lines of prosthesis or limb implants. And so they developed this platform where an arm is operated through a BCI, brain computer interface, and using implants in the somatosensory cortex, which is the part of the brain that's responsible for sensory feedback, as well as another area of the brain, also putting in an implant there. And they had one patient volunteer who had the need for prosthetics, use this robotic arm, and over the process of doing these different tasks, using this kind of board setup that they found that when he had the sensory implants turned on, he was actually able to do the tasks much faster when the sensory feedback was enabled. And they think that this system or this kind of approach might dramatically improve patients trying to recover with a new prosthetic without having full motor or sensory control of their limbs. So this maybe is a very heartening innovation for folks who are looking to consider prosthetics in their lives. This next robot, called the Digger Finger, presumably I don't have an image to scale of whether this actually looks like a finger, is a size like a finger, but the idea of this robot is able to understand what is beneath the surface, particularly with granular material like sand or gravel, and can tactily sense objects buried beneath the surface. When you think about maybe for those folks on Surfside who are trying to dig out victims from that collapse of that condominium, this kind of device might be of particular use. So the device has the ability to poke through material, twist and vibrate gently to understand the obstructions that are beneath the surface area and understand the shape of that submerged object. The team actually intends for this technology to be used for disarming bombs, identifying a bomb under the surface of, for example, soil, and find buried landmines, but also find and inspect for buried cables as well, particularly useful for the telecom industry. All right, this diagnostic is a test for childhood tuberculosis. The standard approach to test for tuberculosis really is only able to be achieved for children who are more than a year old. And this this product is able to evaluate the presence of TB up to a year before the symptoms are evident. And of course, that's particularly useful in infants who aren't able to articulate their symptoms, and their symptoms certainly aren't as obvious. And the conventional methodology is that the patient has to generate a respiratory sputum, so coughing up something from the lungs, enabled to evaluate for the disease. Well, this uses a blood test, and it checks for a protein called CFP10 that's secreted by bacteria up to 60 weeks before the tuberculosis symptoms develop. So really pretty much a game changer for diagnosing TB. So the project team are looking to develop a low-cost portable device that can support point-of-care testing, and so it really could have some really important impact in emergency rooms as well. Imagine that a test being something that's kind of a standard of care for a baby soon after birth as well. This next device, called the Prompt, which is an acronym standing for Portable Rapid On-Cartridge Magnofluidic Purification Testing Platform. Prompt is much easier to pronounce. This is a low-cost device that works with a paired app to diagnose for gonorrhea in less than 15 minutes. The test can determine if a disease strain or can also respond to frontline antibiotics, which is useful for clinicians looking to help treat the issue. So the device runs on a 5-volt battery, a standard one there, and there's a thermoplastic single-use cartridge that costs about $2 to produce. A swab of body fluid, it could be saliva, it could be blood, is mixed with a solution of the magnetic particles in the tube, and a drop of that mixed solution is loaded onto the cartridge, which snaps onto the device and then runs a PCR analysis. It has a 97% accuracy rate, and the turnaround time is shown, the test is shown on a smart screen, and is much faster. That 15 minutes is much faster than the conventional lab that can take up to a week to deliver results. So also a game changer for those folks with the condition. A startup company has been formed to work through the regulatory approval process as well as start up their manufacturing. They piloted it in Baltimore and Uganda, coming out of Johns Hopkins. That's the Baltimore reference there. Okay, for those who've bought electric cars or thinking about them, this was a surprise, a piece of information nugget for me, in that electronic motors don't last forever because they rely on resin that unfortunately becomes brittle and eventually fails over time, and that renders the electric motor to actually stop functioning. So it's something that we want to be able to monitor, but there isn't, up till now, there's not been an easy way to determine resin degradation. So the resin in particular is containing tightly wound copper wires, which are critical for the electric motor to function. So this academic team in Germany out of Martin Luther University have studied these resins to identify how they behave over time, and as they start to degrade, they release an alcohol, specifically an alcohol that can then change a dye that will bind to it and change color to fluoresce green, providing a clear indication of that alcohol presence. So they're anticipating, this team is anticipating that electric cars could start to be equipped with this resin containing the dye, and then an optical reader can be also embedded in the motor to check for the resin state and alert the car owner when levels get high, and then just determine what they do next in terms of changing that motor or getting a alternative solution to improve the resin insulation. All right, moving into imaging. This is a tumor imaging camera that works with hexachromatics. Apparently, mantis shrimp can perceive colors, 12 colors, compared to the human eye that perceives 3. And so the mantis shrimp have been an inspiration for the optical filters and semiconductors built into this special camera that is using near infrared light. So when combined with near infrared probes placed on a patient, the imaging can really much more clearly visualize a tumor in the body during surgery. And so what this can enable a tumor surgeon to be able to do is see the entirety of the tumor, be able to be sure that they've entirely removed it, including margins, and minimize the need to go back and take out more tumor, and also prevent the recurrence of cancer. So a really great invention coming out of University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign. All right, moving into therapy devices, the PerQseal Plus is a second generation device. We actually featured the PerQseal by Vivasure Medical when they first launched their first generation back in 2018. This second generation device is designed to seal large bore blood vessel punctures, particularly including TAVR or transcatheter aortic valve replacements, as well as abdominal aneurysm repair procedures. And it uses an implant patch that is transvascular. So the device is applied to the puncture from inside the vessel wall, and that patch material is fully absorbable, so no sutures are required. And the full deployment of this patch takes just 10 steps, and so they believe it is this particular team coming out of Ireland, believe the implant is much easier to use compared to sutures, and actually has much less of an impact on vessel integrity. The wall of the vessel, you're thinking about, taking a needle and threading through sutures on a vessel wall that can really lead to some compromise, particularly where a patient has stenosis or you're wanting to avoid thrombosis as a future complication. So they're going through clinical trials, and the reason for this press release is that they enrolled their first patient in Europe, and they're expecting to roll this out to, I believe it was 60 patients as part of their first clinical trials. Mike Metz, the engineer in Minnesota, also flagged this one for us. He sent this to me this morning. This is a rapid emergency actuated tamponade, or essentially a block that can swell into and minimize the impact of a wound. This actually came out of a product design student at Loughborough University in the UK who had friends who had survived stab wounds, but only just. And when we, as a human, get a stab wound in what's called a junctional area, like the abdomen or the groin or the armpit, it is really difficult to stem the bleeding and stop a hemorrhage quickly. And so this device comes in two parts and is essentially designed to essentially stem that wound bleeding as quickly as possible in under a minute. So the first part is a medical grade balloon, silicone balloon, which is this portion here, that's inserted into the wound. And then a portable air compressor, which is the second part, is attached to the balloon and inflates it to a preset volume that then can keep the pressure on the wound from inside the body. It's easy and fast to remove compared to some of the current methods, you know, for example, for expanding self-expanding foam that have been used by the military in particular for critical wound stemming or bleeding. And that because of the simplicity of the device, it's you're able to remove this balloon much more easily and then give the patient a chance for a better outcome of reconstructive surgery. This particular design student has patented this device and plans to form a company as a result of his time at Loughborough. All right, moving into drug delivery, but also coming back to materials. This is a piezoelectric polymer that is able to precisely release drug on command, coming out of University of California, Riverside. With many drug releasing implants, they are not really able to precisely control the rate of release. There are a number of biological factors that vary from human to human as a result. And so this new device has incorporated the biocompatible polymer nanofibers that have piezoelectrical qualities and can hold an electrical charge in response to, and release that electrical charge in response to mechanical stress. So within these thin layers of the fibers the drug load of molecules can be inserted and then covered with a hydrogel. When physiologically safe shock waves are applied to that hydrogel, again, that mechanical stress, that causes the polymer fibers to produce an electrical charge that then releases some of the electrically static charged drug molecules to be then released. And so that allows for some real precision dosing of medication repeatedly over an extended period of time in a much more controlled manner. Still staying on drug delivery, this polymer wafer vaccine coming out of the University of Minnesota is taking the idea of protein-based vaccines and addressing the fact that some of the drug molecules are just too large to pass under the sublingual or sub-tongue mucous membranes in time before the tablet just dissolves and the drug payload essentially goes into the GI tract where it can't actually make as much of an impact. So this is a novel wafer that's made with two polymers, one polymer called carboxymethyl cellulose, or CMC for short, and a seaweed-derived alginate, which the vaccine is then added to between those two polymer layers. So the CMC polymer its primary characteristic is super sticky, kind of think peanut butter level, that adheres to the underneath of the tongue, and it adheres for long enough that that high concentration of the drug vaccine can pass through. The alginate layer is there to protect and preserve the molecules at room temperature. So instead of some of the cold storage vaccines that we're seeing, for example, the COVID vaccines having to live with and be handled with a really complex supply chain methodology, now we can start to think about how vaccines can stay at a room temperature and therefore have a much lower level of control associated with them. In the mice lab test that they've done, this wafer was used to deliver HIV proteins that they anticipate could be part of a future HIV vaccine. They also anticipate this wafer vaccine could also be used for a COVID vaccine down the road as well. So yay for that. All right, another drug delivery is also a sensor device that, excuse me, monitors anesthetics during an operation. So today, an anesthesiologist is basing their initial dose of how much anesthetic to give a patient based on age and weight and gender. And supplemental doses are administered during an operation to keep the patient asleep as they start to move. But really, clinicians really want to use as little anesthesia as possible to minimize, the impact of recovery as well as addiction. So what this device is able to do is continuously monitor anesthetic levels in a patient's bloodstream during surgery, so that only the minimal amount of dosing that is extra that's needed can be applied. So sensors in the needle that are inserted into the vein can detect concentrations of the propofol, which is one of the primary anesthetics that are used in blood serum. And then that data is transmitted via Bluetooth to guide the clinician to adjust the levels very precisely and meticulously. Another material now in the COVID universe, this is a nanofiber aerosol filter coming also out of University of California, Riverside. This filter is able to remove coronavirus aerosols from the air at a much, much higher efficacy rate than even some of the masks that we've become so used to wearing. The material is made using an electrospun fiber that's 167 times thinner than one single human hair. So really very, very thin. And these fibers contain tiny pores that hold an electrical charge that's placed during that electrospinning process. And that electrical charge essentially captures the aerosols on those nasty coronaviruses. And because the material is so highly porous, it's actually, you're able to breathe as a user wearing the mask, wearing the material as a mask. So this was evaluated compared to both surgical as well as standard cotton masks, and they found that they had a much higher level of efficacy, 99.9% using this electrospun fiber. This next COVID innovation is a 1-second COVID saliva test. There are so many COVID tests out there now using saliva, using blood, but this one is really truly remarkable in its speed of turnaround of the test. It's a collaboration between the University of Florida and a Chinese team from National Chiao Tung University. It's got a combination of microfluidics that detect the presence of a protein in the saliva sample. It uses antibodies to detect for the presence of the virus, and there's a gold electrode that's studied with those antibodies. And as the protein from the virus binds to the electrode, that changes the electrical charge that runs through it and allows the device to detect for the virus and to measure its presence. A test strip is connected to the handset to perform the analysis. So we've seen a number of different technologies like this, but 1 second is really a potential game changer. All right, moving into the other category. This is a category that I kind of delegated for interesting technologies that are not necessarily med tech, but are of use and as an analogous reference point for us in the work that we do. So this first one is called the Sonar System, coming from a company of the same name. It was invented by a swimmer to allow a coach to communicate with a swimmer underwater without losing his voice from shouting so hard. There's a walkie-talkie that the coach holds and a bone conducting speaker receiver that's worn by the swimmer that can be placed either under a swimming cap or clipped to a goggle strap. As of course the coach is voicing his command to the walkie-talkie, and that's received in real time at a range of 300 meters, a depth of 1 meter underwater. Using different frequencies, this is really the mind-blowing thing for me, that coach can communicate with up to 30 swimmers at once, can talk to them individually or in groups, particularly a relay team, for example, to encourage them on. They are accepting pre-orders today for end of July delivery at $149 per unit. For the musicians out there, the Motion Sonic by Sony is a wearable effects generator that is able to generate different sound effects and pitch changes just by the gesture of a hand or gesture of a finger as you're playing an instrument. It's been designed initially for guitarists and keyboard. The device has 6 axis motion sensors that are able to relay movement over Bluetooth to a paired app, and that triggers a modulation effect to a audio speaker outlet that's connected to the instrument. So the effects include a distortion, a reverb, and a delay just from how you move your hand. What's really interesting to me about this technology is that Sony has launched it through Indiegogo, which is really quite remarkable for Sony. They could just launch anything from any retailer anywhere, and it potentially could be successful. But the reason why they're doing this is they're wanting musicians to help them build the design to be optimal for musicians. So really encouraging a co-collaboration opportunity through Indiegogo. And they're planning for a March 2022 launch. And if you sign up now, you can receive the product for $220 as an early bird pricing. This next in the other category is also a UI. We've seen a number of different folding and rolling displays. While Samsung is not wanting to sit on its heels at all, they've launched a 7.2-inch OLED display that has a double fold in it. They're calling it the S Fold for obvious reasons. And they've also launched a 17-inch foldable screen that expands out to the size of a computer monitor from a tablet size, as seen on the image on the right-hand side. They're also planning a rollable screen technology that uses rollers and hinges to expand, coming to the market at some point in the future, TBD. We featured in a previous tech forum, I believe it was last month, either Facebook or Amazon or maybe Google was launching the idea of a hologram as a AV tool for remote sessions. Well, WeWork, which is mostly known for its co-working spaces that you can rent, is now trying to expand itself as a technology company and is setting up the ability for its WeWork tenants to host live events and panel discussions where the presenters are on stage as holograms, life-size holograms, but they're somewhere else in the world. And the presenters themselves, in order to participate in this particular session, can go to a capture studio that's close to where they live, WeWork close to where they live. And at the host's site, where the audience presumably is, there is a 5-inch wide, 10-inch high, or 10 feet high, sorry, HoloPod that has a high definition projector, audio speakers, and an audience facing camera and microphone so that the presenters, wherever they are in the world, can see, hear, and field questions. This partnership between WeWork and ARH Media is planning to install this capability in 16 locations globally before the end of this quarter that we've just started. So maybe at some point in the future, we could do this session as a hologram. That would be kind of fun, I suppose. All right, the next in this other category is a product called Cooksy. This almost made it into the category for me, which is the last one, which is what on earth are they thinking? Is there really a business promise here? This is a module that you mount to your oven top and uses both optical and thermal imaging along with a paired app to observe your cooking steps and help you walk through a app-based video recipe. So the camera confirms that you're adding and removing the correct ingredients at the right times and also cooking with the right temperature because it has a thermal capability. And if the pan is too hot or too cold, you can be notified via the app, presumably if you've left the stovetop cooking. Rule number one in cooking is not to do that. When the temperature is just right, the app can also act as a timer, telling you to essentially move on to the next step in the recipe. The system can be used to create recipes, so potentially for those people who are looking to have a social media platform and mix things together and then don't remember really what they've done, you can then visually record all of that, and the device is able to track cooking times and temperatures as well. For $649, I could probably follow a recipe on my own, but they are seeking early birds partners through an Indiegogo funding campaign. These glasses have the capability of changing their tint on command, called Dusk, and built or developed by a company called Ampere, with the touch of button on a phone app or even a button on the device itself, the user can change a tint in response to electrical signals built into the electrochromic lens. The app itself has a sliding bar that can allow you to go from a 0 tint to all the way up to 100 or 97 or 95 if you were that finicky. Your favorite settings can be saved in a profile. The tint change happens in 0.1 second, which is remarkably fast. And the premium model of the Dusk, I think it's called the Dusk Plus, includes built-in speakers and a mic for hands-free calls and listening to music, because now our glasses can do that as well. The sunglasses themselves have a 7-day battery life. It's not clear whether you have to change out the battery or if it's rechargeable based on the article that's here. But again, they're seeking Indiegogo funding for an August next year delivery for $249 a pair. I was on a call earlier today where folks were complaining about poop left in their yard and or having to pick up other dogs' poop. So for those folks who are listening, you might be delighted to know that this product is coming, called the Beetle. It is an autonomous robot that cruises your lawn in search of dog poop with the help of onboard cameras. Once the poop is located, it can pick it up and place it in a container that you then throw out once it gets full. The robot can be programmed to roam to the perimeter of your yard and not beyond it. It runs on batteries that are recharged, and it can know to recharge itself when it's about to run out of power. A future generation of the device is not only going to be able to pick up the poop, but also mow your lawn as well. In development. Those people who like explosives and the people who complain about the poop and also complain about and also love explosives probably overlap in Ximedica, but for the rest of us, this is a hyper-react detonation engine coming out of University of Central Florida. So this is an engine that harnesses the power of sustained trapped explosion, enabling the propulsion of an aircraft up to 13,000 miles per hour, which is 17 times the speed of sound for those nerds out there. So this is obviously challenging the conventional combustion engine, which burns fuel with oxygen at high temperatures, and that's slow and it's safe and it's controlled release, of course, is something that we want in an engine. But this detonation engine uses explosive material and what they call a poke to create an unstable chemical bond to generate shockwave energy. So that's what detonation is, of course. But UCF have developed a variation of a rotating detonation engine, which uses shock waves from one detonation to trigger further explosions in a ring-shaped channel. And that creates a standing wave, or what they're calling an oblique wave detonation engine. And so this is producing a continuous detonation that's hopefully more stable and can stay in place as opposed to going everywhere. So this technology means that potentially space rockets can fly into orbit without having to have separate rocket boosters that then become trash in outer space, and can have all sorts of military implications that I probably don't even want to think about, but interesting nonetheless. Okay, the last one in our set in the last few minutes that we have, I put this in the hard category because I can't imagine anyone signing up for this, but there were 7 people who did as part of a clinical trial. It's called the Dental Slim, and it looks like what it is a lock that holds your teeth together to prevent your mouth from opening wider than 2 millimeters, which forces you to be on a liquid diet. It is a weight loss device coming out of a New Zealand academic team. And so they did a study with obese patients who are looking to dramatically reduce their weight as probably their waistlines, and they agreed to sign on to wear this device for 14 days and adopt a liquid diet. And as a result of that trial, those 7 patients lost an average of 14 pounds. The device comes with an emergency unlocking tool, presumably if you want to put something back out of your body. And if there was an emergency issue of another kind, and the users were meant to carry this unlocking device with them at all times. The academic team feel that this product has all kinds of value for weight loss, and particularly one of the biggest issues for weight loss is compliance, obvious reasons. You see a cookie, you want a cookie. And they claim that this device has a merit in the marketplace because it's non-invasive, it's reversible, and it's low cost, particularly compared to some of the biometric surgical procedures that are out there today. And because over time your body learns to adapt to this liquid diet and the lower calorie diet, you are able to establish habits over time. But it still seems to be pretty Neanderthal to me. So with that, we are done for today. In terms of content, we keep an archive of these forums going back over now 6 years, and we often mine them for projects where we want to be inspired and or understand what else is in the space that's coming out of academia. So please feel free to reach out if you're interested. Our next innovation forum we're planning for the 12th of August, but I'll defer to the rest of the NEMIC team to guide me on that. And here are the links if you want to follow up.